Hey everybody, welcome back to my studio. In this video, I'm going to create a value scale. You see, I've prepared my watercolor paper here with a grid that has 10 spaces in it, and they go from 1 up to 10. And I'm going to show you how a value scale is created, which numbers represent which value, and how this is a valuable exercise to do if you are learning to paint in watercolor. All subjects that we paint in watercolor are essentially made up of various values. It's more helpful sometimes or easier to see those values when we look at a black and white photograph of a subject because we don't see color. And of course, color is wonderful and we want to paint with color, but sometimes color is confusing to the eye because we put down a color and we don't really realize the value represented by that color, that color might be much darker than the other colors around it in terms of its value. The value really being the relative lightness or darkness of the color in relationship to other colors around it. And so a good watercolor painting should have a full range of values from lightest light, really value 10 is what it's called, essentially the color of the paper, or white, all the way up to the darkest dark, which is actually value 1. And so we can see in this picture of a Labrador Retriever that there are areas that are just completely black, value 1, and there are areas that you could pick up that would maybe be the lightest light in the picture, maybe right over here and right on the back. There would probably be the very lightest points, a couple of places in highlight in here. And those would be on the lightest end of the scale of values, and other areas would be on the very darkest. And to really excel in watercolor, you want to learn how to paint the full range of values. And you need to learn to do that ultimately with color. But again, as I said earlier, colors have different values. For example, red is a color that has a very dark value. When you put it on the paper, again, you see red, but if you were to reduce it and just look at its value in comparison, its relative lightness and darkness compared to the rest of the colors around it, you would find that red typically has a very dark value. Yellow, other colors like that have a very light value. And so it's helpful to take just one color off your palette. In this case, I'm going to do indigo because it's a grayish color, and I'm going to create a value study or a value scale. So it's helpful to have a value scale. The only one I could find right now here in my workshop, in my studio, is this one on the color wheel, and we can see here on the inner wheel I have colors, and I move this in a little bit here, hopefully you can see that go all the way from value 10 right here, which is the white of the paper. There's no value, no paint or pigment applied in that spot, so it's value 10 or white, all the way through 10 value steps to value 1. And over here is the black, completely darkest value you can get, which we would consider black on a grayscale, value 1. Okay. And the attempt here is to try, or the exercise that's helpful is to try to take one color on your palette, and it could be any color, and go all the way and make, starting with 10 and go all the way to 1 or go the other way, and try to see if you can get all 10 steps. Okay, again, value 10 is just the color of the paper, so you don't put any pigment there, but then you try to get the very darkest pigment that you could get, or darkest value you could get with that pigment here in value 1, and then just see what you can do, okay? Some colors would lend themselves to this better, like maybe red would be easier because you could get a really dark color, or purple, or a dark blue or something. Some colors, like yellow, might be harder to get a true value 1 because the pigment is just not as dark of a value. So I've chosen indigo, which is a bluish gray, and I've put a few little puddles of it onto my palette here from the darkest shade here and around, and I just was trying to just create some initial little puddles or mixes of the pigment so that I could go in here and start doing this. Again, 10 is the color of the paper. That value scale 10, it seems a little opposite. You might think of 10 as being the darkest color, but it's actually the lightest. And so value 10, we're going to leave and put no pigment here. And then 1 down here is going to be our darkest value. I'm actually going to start with the very darkest value that I can get from my indigo pigment here, and go ahead and fill this area. Okay. Now I really need to have as little water on the brush as possible at this point. And so I'm going to dry the brush out, kind of clean it out here, and just dry it out, because I really want to just pick up off my palette here in the well with the indigo just as much pigment as possible with as little water, because obviously the more water it gets mixed into the mix, the more washed out, transparent, non-opaque that area will be. Okay, so there's my value 1 with indigo. Indigo on my palette, this is a Daniel Smith color, if you're wondering. And Daniel Smith Indigo, I love it. Alrighty, so now I'm going to take that same, pretty close to that same mix of pigment here. And I think it would be helpful if you have your color wheel in your hand. So I put down this value here, okay? And now I'm moving over to this next one, value 2. And so it's not a lot lighter, but it is lighter. So I'm going to come in here and put that in there, okay? And that there might just do the trick, okay? It's similar in color, but it's a little lighter. Now the one thing about watercolor, especially when I'm putting it down in a fairly large area here, is that there are gradations within that little area that I just painted. So it goes from kind of a lighter to a darker in the center. And I also know it's going to dry lighter than what I see. So I'm gonna call that good. That's my value 2. Value 3, okay, coming in here and kind of comparing what I want to do here. This is challenging. It's challenging, and you'll see it in a second, especially as we go through all 10 values. It's challenging to get all 10 values with the single color, and you just really need to make real small changes from one value square to the next. So I'm trying here to really to get this to be, it's still fairly dark at this point, but it is, the next value stop here. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay. And I'm going to go over, and I obviously need a bit more water now in my mix. Going to value 4. I'm looking at my value reference. And again, if I put too much in, then it goes a little too dark, and I lift a little bit to get that to be where I want it to be. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go to now value 5, which is kind of right in the middle of the value scale, about halfway between the darkest dark and the lightest light. And I think it needs to be a little darker than that, again, because I'm aware that this is going to dry lighter than what I see currently. And also, I just don't want the difference from one step to the next to be too great. These are real small, fine changes from one step to the next. Okay, looks pretty good. Now I'm going up actually here to value 6. Just a little bit lighter than that. Now I might think to myself, well, I'm on the other side of the scale, so now I might think, well, I want maybe more, more water than pigment. That's a way of thinking about it. Whoops. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. This is training your eye to see value. Okay? Relative lightness and darkness of an area of your painting or drawing. This also applies to drawing. And your training of your eye in this regard is really fundamental to your training, your ability to reproduce shapes, to reproduce subjects in watercolors, your ability to really control the value and to see the difference between them. I feel like I want to maybe make this one just a smidge darker. Of course, we all know that when we go back into an area that's already wet in watercolor, if we bring in too much pigment or water, we can end up getting kind of a strange bloom with the water and all. But so I'm trying to also avoid that. But I dried off the brush a bit, and okay. So that was value 7. So now I'm going over to value 6. Remember, value 10 here is going to have absolutely nothing on it. So between here now with 8 and 9, I need to go from the 7 to completely white. Okay, so we can see I'm going to get pretty light here on these next ones. This is value 8. Because I need to make that gradual change now from this value here, 7, to no pigment whatsoever at 10. So I think that looks pretty good for my value 8. And last but not least here, then I'm going to value 9 is I'm just going to put down and as you can see on my palette, I'm just mixing a lot of water. I hardly have any pigment there in that mix on the palette now. And I'm going to put that in there and try to get this value 9. And we see what that looks like there. Okay. So again, a good challenge to choose a color on your palette, and you would want to choose a pigment that can get dark darks, and not all colors can. And then mix that color, that pigment, in such a way that you can move through all, really 9 value steps, because the last value step, 10, has no pigment in it whatsoever, and see if you can create your own value scale with that particular color. And what I'm going to do in my next video is I'm actually going to now do a painting with just indigo and try to represent an actual subject with this one color, a monochromatic painting with the colors as I've now experimented with my different values. I hope this was helpful, and if so, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you're notified the next time I do a video. And yeah, thanks for visiting my studio today. I'm glad to have you on the journey.